Hey guys, tonight we drift back, not to the feasts of kings or the clang of steel on steel, but to a place the maps forgot, a village too small for records, too quiet for glory, and too ordinary for the bards to bother with. You won't find a castle here, no painted tapestries or shining armor, just smoke, mud, and people who lived entire lives within the same 10 muddy acres. You're one of them now. The year? Doesn't matter. You don't know it anyway. What matters is the cold in your bones, the callus on your palm, and the flicker of firelight behind a thatched wall that leaks when it rains, which is often. You live on the edge, not metaphorically, the actual edge of the forest, of the manor lands, of the kind of history people sing about. The world stops just past your fields. Roads, if they can be called that, turn into ruts. Trees grow too thick to pass. Even sunlight filters down like it's not sure it's welcome. You've never seen a map, not even sure what one is. If someone handed you parchment with lines and names, you'd wonder why anyone bothered. Why mark the world when your whole life fits between a cold stream, a slumping barn, and the patch of woods that sometimes echoes at night? Here, the world ends where the trees begin, and that's not just a poetic turn of phrase. That's survival logic. Your village, if it can even be called one, doesn't have a name, at least not one anyone writes down. It's just home. There's no sign at the entrance, no gate, no road that leads to anything meaningful. Just a trail worn by footsteps, ox carts, and the weight of repetition. It sits nestled in a shallow dip in the land, far enough from anything important that no tax collector bothers to show up without a very good reason. And a few extra guards. The forest wraps around you like a tired guardian, not always friendly, but always watching. The trees creak like they remember better days. Sometimes you think they're whispering. Other times, you think it's just the wind playing tricks on your ears. Either way, you don't walk too far past the Elder's Grove. Not alone. Not at dusk. Your entire life has played out in a space no larger than a merchant's map corner. You were born in the same straw-packed room where you'll likely die. Maybe 60 steps from one end of your existence to the other. You don't count years. You count harvests. Wet ones, dry ones. The one where the barley gave up too early. The one where old Marjorie smiled for a whole week because the rye came in thick. The houses here are half collapsed on purpose, or at least it looks that way. Walls lean like they've given up trying to stand straight. They're made of wattle and daub, mud, straw, and sticks, all patched by hand over and over until the patchwork becomes the wall itself. The roofs sag beneath their own weight, thatched and stitched with whatever can be gathered before winter sets in. Leaks are common. Buckets are permanent fixtures. You know where to place them, even in the dark. That's how often it rains through your ceiling. It smells like living here. You didn't notice it growing up, but when travelers pass through, rare as they are, they wrinkle their noses. Wet wool, smoke, livestock, damp wood, a bit of rot in the corners. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to remind you this place is real. You grow used to it, like the scratch in your throat during cold mornings, or the ache in your spine before the sun reaches its peak. It's just the smell of surviving. The village holds about a dozen families. Less now, after that last fever. Everyone knows everyone. Every cough, every argument, every rumor. You know whose goat got loose last summer? Who has a crush on whose sister? who might be a little too familiar with the well after dark. And of course, you all pretend not to know until pretending stops being polite. The village elder, if you can call him that, is Tom. No last name, just Tom. He once spoke to a monk who was traveling through, and now he repeats that conversation like scripture. No one questions him. His hut hasn't collapsed, and his goat is still breathing. That's the closest thing you have to leadership. Honestly, it's enough. There's no school, no tavern, no blacksmith, just tools handed down, repaired until the handles forget who first carved them. If something breaks, you fix it or make do without. If something new appears, say a stranger, you talk about it for weeks. Where did they come from? What do they want? Are they cursed? Do they smell like salt? Salt means the sea, and the sea is a myth around here. You've never seen it. You've only tasted it once, when a trader passed through with preserved fish. It tasted like something that didn't belong on land, something ancient and wrong, and maybe sacred. You weren't sure whether to thank him or avoid eye contact. And that's the thing. You've heard of places, cities where the walls are stone and the roofs don't leak, where people speak in strange tongues and buy things with metal coins, where water flows from pipes and music plays that doesn't come from someone humming behind a plow. But those aren't destinations to you. They're bedtime stories. You don't travel, not because you're afraid, not exactly, because you have things to do. The fence needs mending. The firewood needs stacking. Someone's sheep wandered off again. The steward might come by this week, and someone has to remember how many eggs were promised. And even if you did leave, what then? You don't speak any other dialect. You don't carry coin. You don't know how to ask for bread, let alone a bed. You don't know how to be anywhere else. Even your age is a guess. Somewhere between young enough to climb a tree and old enough to complain about your knees. So you stay, not because you're trapped, because this is yours. In the strange, weary, stubborn way that things become yours when you've poured sweat into the earth and patched the same hole in the same roof 6 times. There's comfort in knowing which way the wind smells before snow, in knowing who to borrow a tool from, in knowing the rhythm of your own narrow world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because for all its mud and creaking wood, your home is warm tonight. Your body is sore but satisfied. And somewhere, out past the crooked fence, a sheep coughs quietly in the dark. You smile without knowing why. Maybe it's the fire. Maybe it's the peace. Maybe it's just that, for one more day, you endured. Your eyes flutter open before the sun fully climbs over the trees. The sky's just a smudge of pale gray, the kind that tells you it'll rain later, but not until your knees start aching more than usual. You stretch your legs out across the straw mattress. It crunches faintly beneath you. A blend of last year's hay, this year's rushes, and probably a few insects you've chosen not to think about. You share this space with your younger brother, 2 cousins, and the family dog. who somehow always ends up with the warmest corner. It's not luxurious, but it's warm, usually. You rise, careful not to wake anyone, and step onto the packed earth floor. It's not cold, biting. Even in summer, the chill of the morning air sneaks through every crack in the walls. You pull on your tunic, wool over wool, and toss an old cloak across your shoulders. It smells like smoke and goat, which, to be fair, is probably how you smell too. There's comfort in consistency. The fire in the hearth has nearly died out, just glowing coals and the memory of heat. You kneel to stoke it gently, coaxing life back into it with a few sticks, and a prayer mumbled more out of habit than hope. The prayer's short, something about St. Bridget and keeping fingers unburnt. You don't know if it works, but you've yet to lose a finger, so why tempt fate? The house is small, more like a single room than a home, really. Walls of wattle and daub, patched where the weather found new ways to intrude. The roof is thatch, darkened by time and sagging in the center like a tired man's shoulders. Every season you promise to fix it. Every season it sags a little more. It doesn't leak in every corner. That's something. You cross to the door. The latch is just a wooden peg, enough to keep the chickens in and the wind mostly out. You push it open and step into the morning. The world outside smells like damp earth and old ash. A low mist clings to the ground. You hear a rooster crow 2 huts down. Yours is quieter, older, and might have lost interest in punctuality. Your first task is predictable. Check the goats, make sure nothing got into the storage pit, and gather wood. Always the wood. Firewood is life here. Cooking, warmth, smoke to keep the bugs away. Smoke to convince yourself this home has walls, even when you can see daylight between the planks. You think about wood more than most people think about love. The goats bleat lazily as you approach, more annoyed than grateful. You check their hooves, refill their trough, and offer a pat on the head to the one that doesn't bite. There's a kind of quiet conversation here. They know you. You know them. Neither of you asks too much from the other. You glance toward the horizon. Trees, always trees. The forest looms nearby, thick and unmoving. You've never gone more than a mile in. Maybe a little further once during a dare that involved a berry bush and a pair of very fast legs. The forest isn't a place for wandering. People vanish in it. Not dramatically, just gone. And the woods don't explain themselves. Back inside, the rest of the family is stirring. Your mother feeds the fire and begins stirring the pot. Always the same pot. Pottage. It's not a meal. It's a condition. It bubbles endlessly. Ingredients coming and going like gossip. Barley, cabbage, yesterday's onions, a few leaves that might be herbs or might be weeds, depending on who you ask. Today, it smells mostly like garlic. You're not sure whether that's intentional or just the ghost of a bulb you had last week. Breakfast is silent. A few spoonfuls of pottage, a hunk of yesterday's bread that could probably dent armor, and some warm ale. Yes, ale. Even the children drink it. Not the strong stuff, the small beer. Weak, cloudy, barely fermented, just enough to kill whatever horrors the well water tried to deliver. The morning light creeps in through the slits in the wall. One beam hits the fire and glows like a blessing. You sit near it, soaking it in. For a moment, the world is quiet. Your brother hums under his breath. Your father coughs. The dog sneezes dramatically. You smirk. Not joy exactly, but its cousin. After breakfast, chores begin. Everyone has a task. Yours is the fence. Again. It leans like it's trying to escape the village. You gather tools, one of which is just a rock with a handle, and head out. The path is muddy, as always, but your feet know the way. They've walked it every day since before you remember. You could do it blind. Probably have, once or twice. As you work, you notice the house across the lane. Old Elric is outside, talking to himself again. He's been talking to the saints ever since his wife died. Or maybe before. No one asks. He still brings in more firewood than anyone, so whatever he's saying must be working. You nod at him. He doesn't nod back, but he stops muttering. That's hello enough. Around midday, the sun peeks through the clouds. A soft breeze picks up, carrying with it the smell of damp wool and baking bread from a neighbor's oven. You pause to stretch. Your back cracks audibly. A sign of life, or maybe just poor posture. You glance toward the sky. No clouds yet, but the wind smells like rain. You tighten the rope on the fence, brush the mud from your hands, and head home. At the door, your sister hands you a handful of wild garlic wrapped in an old cloth. She grins like she's just brought back treasure. And in a way, she has. It's the little victories that matter. A root that didn't rot. A chicken that laid 2 eggs instead of 1. A patch of dry roof during the storm. Inside, your mother hums while adding the garlic to the pot. You sit down, warm your hands by the fire, and listen to the wood crackle. It's not much, this life, but it's yours. Historians still argue whether peasants had true community in the modern sense, or simply mutual survival. But when someone fixes your fence without being asked, or shares their only onion because your stew looks gray, it's hard to care what scholars call it. Oh, and here's a fun tidbit. Archaeologists once found a medieval latrine with a carved wooden seat. So yes, someone out there literally invented the toilet seat centuries before the printing press. Priorities, clearly. And as you lean back, staring at the thatch above, noting which corner might need patching next week, you realize you've made it through another morning. The stew didn't burn. The fence mostly stands. And for now, the rain hasn't come. Not yet anyway. The day stretches ahead of you, not with anticipation, but with inevitability. You already know how it will go, not because you're a prophet, but because it's gone this way for as long as you've been alive. Days here don't surprise you. They wear grooves into your memory, the same way carts do to the road. And honestly, you're grateful for that. At least grooves are dependable. You step outside again, squinting at the sky. The sun has decided to show up for once, sitting low and pale above the hills, offering a bit of warmth if you're lucky enough to catch it at the right angle. You tilt your face toward it, not for comfort, but to estimate the time. No clocks, no bells, unless the wind is just right, and someone remembered to ring the chapel's rickety old one 5 miles away. Out here, time is measured by the length of your shadow and the ache in your joints. Mid-morning is the wrist crack. Noon is the dull throb in your lower back. Evening arrives with the heaviness in your eyes. There are no calendars either. Not really. You don't say April or July. You say after the frost, or near St. Michael's, or when the turnips went soft last year. Seasons blur into each other. Spring isn't a date. It's a dampness that soaks your sleeves. Summer is when the flies outnumber the blessings. Autumn is the panic of unfinished work. Winter is winter, and you feel it in your teeth before you feel it in the air. You glance down the path and see your neighbor lugging a basket full of rushes. He nods, doesn't stop walking. That's conversation enough. You'll see him again in the evening, or tomorrow, or during the next communal thatch repair day, when everyone shows up with more complaints than tools. Chores now shift from home to field. You carry your tools, a hoe with a splintering handle, a bundle of twine, and a pouch with exactly 3 turnip seeds you're praying survive the week. The field is less a place and more an idea. It's wherever the ground hasn't given up yet. Some patches are generous, others stubborn. You till by hand, because beasts are expensive, and the village's only ox is currently limping from an incident involving a rock, a child, and overconfidence. As you work the soil, the rhythm takes over. Hoe, lift, turn, glance at the sky. Hoe, lift, turn, repeat. The mind begins to wander. Not too far, just to the edges. You think about dinner, about whether the goat's cough is getting worse, about the patch of roof that might survive another storm if you just reinforce it with that piece of bark you spotted near the old elm. You think about last year's harvest. It was decent, not great. Better than the one where the barley turned black with rot, and even the rats gave it a pass. That year, people got quiet, not sad, just silent. Silence is the first sign of famine. It creeps in through the cracks before hunger does. But today is not famine. Today is routine. And in routine, there is safety. Around noon, someone calls out, not loudly, but with enough urgency that your ears perk up. You walk back toward the village and find a small gathering near the chapel. A stranger stands in the center, dusty, tall, and entirely out of place. His cloak is too clean. His shoes are intact. He carries a small bag that clinks. You don't trust the clink. Newcomers are like comets, rare, fascinating, and slightly terrifying. You haven't seen a new face in 6 months, maybe more. Everyone gathers quickly, not with weapons, but with questions held behind narrowed eyes. Where did he come from? What does he want? Is he cursed? Does he smell of salt? He speaks slowly in a dialect that feels just slightly off. You can understand him, but it takes effort. He claims to be a trader, offers dried fish, a comb carved from bone, and a pouch of salt. Actual salt. You stare at it like it's treasure, which it is. Your family has tasted salt only a few times in your life, and once, that might have just been chalk someone sold to Tom as a miracle seasoning. The trader talks about a town 2 days' walk south. He says there are stone buildings, real ones, 3 stories high. He says they have lamps that stay lit past nightfall and wells that don't dry out. He says they bake bread with spices. You don't even know what a spice is supposed to taste like. You can only imagine it's like garlic, but bolder and richer and reserved for saints. You don't speak during the trader's tale, but you listen harder than you've listened to anything in weeks. His stories settle like dust in your thoughts. He doesn't stay long, just long enough to swap a bone comb for a loaf of bread and promise to return. He won't. They never do. By the time the sun begins its descent, the village has gone quiet again. But the stillness is a little different now. A few people are dreaming out loud. Your cousin says he might go south someday. Your sister asks what it would feel like to touch a stone house. You just stare at the fire and wonder what it would be like to walk down a street that doesn't turn to soup when it rains. Historians still debate whether peasants truly believed in the greatness of cities or simply tolerated the idea as a kind of myth. But when a stranger walks in, shoes unscuffed and skin unbitten, it's hard not to believe a little. There's even a fringe theory, no joke, that some medieval villages placed carved wooden figures at crossroads to scare off travelers and discourage outsiders, like medieval scarecrows but for people. It didn't always work, obviously. Back at home, the stew is reheated. Again, you eat in silence, taste the same blend of barley, roots, and effort. The taste hasn't changed in weeks, maybe months. But tonight, the garlic lingers longer. Or maybe that's just your imagination, stirred by talk of faraway lands and fish packed in salt. You settle into your spot by the fire as dusk settles. The wind rustles the thatch above you, and a flicker of dream tugs at the edge of your thoughts. Just for a moment. Not rebellion, not adventure, just curiosity. What if? But then you yawn, scratch your elbow, and check if the goat's inside. The traitor is gone. The stew is bubbling, and your back still aches. That's how you know what time it is. The stranger's visit is already becoming legend, even though it only happened this morning. That's how it works here. Time expands when something breaks routine. Someone saw him smile at the widow Letha. You can feel every ridge in the straw beneath you, but you don't mind. The warmth from the hearth still lingers in your bones. Outside, the last sounds of the day retreat. A shutter banging, a cough 2 huts down, final footstep of someone late returning from the pasture. You close your eyes. You don't expect dreams. But tonight, they arrive anyway. The city again. Stone walls, a crowd of people speaking too fast, bread with golden crusts, and something bright shining in a window you can't quite reach. You wake for a moment, turn over, forget it just as quickly. The dog breathes, the house creaks, and somewhere, not too far off, the trees murmur like they're keeping secrets. You'll never know them. And maybe that's for the best. The morning arrives before you're ready for it. You wake not to an alarm. Those don't exist. But to the slow stiffening of your legs, the cool edge of damp air crawling through the shutters, and the sensation of your own back reminding you that straw is not a mattress. Someone's already moving across the room. You hear quiet shuffling, the dull thud of firewood being dropped near the hearth, and the unmistakable cluck of a chicken that slipped inside again. You're not sure how it got in. You're even less sure how it got on top of the storage chest. You sit up. The air is gray, the light barely a whisper on the walls. It's going to be one of those days where the sun never really shows up. Cloud heavy and wet, not from rain, but from the kind of mist that soaks you without bothering to fall. Your first thought, after chicken off the chest, is the same as every morning. What needs fixing? The fence? Still leaning. The tools? Still dull. The roof? Still leaking. It's a strange kind of comfort, knowing what to expect. Like your chores left you a to-do list overnight. Today, the job is hauling compost. Not the glamorous part of farming, if there is one, but the part that smells the loudest. You're moving waste from the animal pens to the edge of the field, spreading it thin, pretending it'll all mix in once you till it deep enough. The wheelbarrow groans in protest with each step, and your arms burn halfway through. You pause to stretch, feel your spine pop like dry twigs, and sigh. This is normal. This is what work is. No one here talks about purpose. Not because they don't have one, but because it's implied. You do what needs doing. You fix what breaks. You repeat it tomorrow. Life here is less a story and more a rhythm. Days aren't chapters. They're beats. But even rhythm has risk. You hear the steward is coming. Not today, but soon. Someone saw him on the road 3 villages over, parchment in hand, scowl on face. He travels with a small group, just enough men to discourage argument. He doesn't knock. He doesn't ask. He observes. He tallies, and then he takes. No one likes the steward, but everyone fears him. Not because he's cruel necessarily, but because he represents something worse. The Lord. A man you've never seen, but whose name you say in your prayers. Not out of love, just in case it matters. When the steward comes, people suddenly remember exactly how many eggs they owe. They scramble to hide the extra sack of oats under the floorboards. Children are told not to speak. Doors are shut tighter than usual. Even the chickens seem quieter. You think back to the last visit. He walked in like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. He asked how many pigs had been born. You said 2, even though there were 3. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. You paid a little more in grain that time. A quiet penalty. Taxes come in many forms here. Grain, wool, labor, eggs, pigs, ale. If you make something, you owe something. If you find something, someone else probably found it first. The Lord owns the land, which means he owns the forest, the river, the mill, and, if you're not careful, your good mood. Historians refer to this system as feudalism, which sounds clinical and almost polite. But it's less a system and more a weight. It sits on your shoulders, invisible but constant, not crushing, just heavy, and it never lifts. You once asked your father why we pay so much. He just shrugged and said, "Because they take it." That was the end of that discussion. There's a saying in the village, pay with coin or pay with quiet. It means, if you don't want trouble, you'd better be invisible. Not too rich, not too loud, not too curious. Just enough to survive. Just enough not to be noticed. And yet, even within the weight of feudal law, you find small ways to breathe. Last spring, you traded an extra goat with the baker 2 villages over. No one saw. That goat became cheese, which became trade for salt, which made your stew slightly less sad for almost a week. That's your rebellion. Quiet, careful, and deeply delicious. Sometimes it feels like everything is taxed, except size. But you're waiting for the day someone finds a way to charge for those too. There's a historical footnote, one of those quirky little details scholars love, that says some lords charged a wedding fee if a peasant wanted to marry someone outside their village. Imagine that. Love. Taxed. You're not surprised. You're just glad you haven't fallen in love with anyone more than 4 huts away. Around midday, you break for lunch. Not a grand affair. A bit of bread that could be weaponized and stew that tastes slightly different than yesterday. Maybe a new root. Maybe a cleaner spoon. Hard to say. You sit under the edge of the thatch, trying to stay dry, watching as the mist thickens into something less romantic. You think of the steward. You wonder if he dreams, if he ever wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks, maybe I'll let them keep the eggs this time. Probably not. He has a ledger. And the ledger doesn't dream. Historians still argue whether stewards were truly feared or simply tolerated as part of the ecosystem, like mosquitoes or damp socks. But everyone agrees on one thing. When the steward visits, the village breathes differently, shallower, softer, like it's trying not to be seen. You finish your bread, lick your fingers, and head back to work. Because no matter how many sacks the steward takes, the fence still leans, the goat still wanders, and the stew still needs tending. And no tax collector, no matter how thorough, has ever figured out how to tax time. You work until the light begins to slant. That golden hour where the sun pretends it's generous before slipping behind the hills. Your back is stiff, your legs ache, and the scent of compost is thoroughly embedded in your skin. You head back toward the house, bucket in hand, and catch sight of smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Someone's already warming the stew. Probably your sister, who adds wild herbs without telling anyone, turning each meal into a mild guessing game. Is that mint? You ask sometimes, or the weeds from behind the compost pile. She just smiles. Inside, the air is thick with warmth, smoke, and the ever-present smell of something boiling. The stew never truly leaves the pot. It's not a dish, it's a permanent resident. Additions come and go. Barley, cabbage, a suspicious root, yesterday's bread crust, maybe a few peas if someone was feeling lucky at the market last week. But the base? That stays. The flavor is less delicious and more emotional support. You dip a ladle and let it fall back with a quiet plop. Thick, brown, comforting. The kind of meal that doesn't surprise you, but fills the space hunger might have claimed. You tear a hunk of bread from the communal loaf. It's dense and dark, made from barley or rye, or maybe just what was left at the bottom of the miller's bin. Sometimes, if times are hard, it's bark bread. No, seriously. Bark. The inner layer, ground up, stretched with whatever flour's left. It's technically edible. That's all anyone asks of it. There are no recipes, no courses, no table manners worth the name. You sit around the hearth, cross-legged or perched on a stool if you're feeling fancy. Everyone eats from their own bowl, unless there aren't enough, in which case sharing happens by silent agreement. The dog lurks nearby, hopeful as always. The fire crackles, the steam rises, you chew. It's not exciting, it's not festive, but it's enough. And enough, here, is everything. Someone asks quietly if the trader might return. Your father grunts. Your mother sighs. Your cousin mutters something about fish that never rot. You nod. It's not conversation. It's consensus. Later, you help clean up. Though clean is generous. The pot is scraped, the bowls are wiped, but the stew never gets fully washed out. That's part of the flavor, or so you tell yourself. Scrubbing wastes water. Water needs boiling. Fire needs wood. Wood needs time. Time is already spent. Afterwards, you pull out your small sack of tasks. A wooden fork that needs reshaping. A sock with a hole. A hinge that's starting to rust. These are the quiet hours, the ones that hum instead of speak. The dog snores. Someone hums. The fire whispers through the thatch. And still, your mind drifts. Where else? To food. Not because you're hungry again, but because food is what survival tastes like. Tomorrow you'll eat this again, and the day after, and the one after that. You'll be grateful, even if you're not excited. You remember the feast day last year, St. Bede, or maybe St. somebody similar. Someone roasted a bird, not a chicken, a goose. The smell alone made people cry. There was honey, borrowed spices, and a pie crust that didn't break teeth. It was glorious. It lasted 3 days, and you haven't stopped talking about it since. But feasts are rare. Most days, food is problem solving. You work with what you have. You stretch it. You repurpose it. You pray it doesn't mold. You scrape off the green bits and keep chewing. If you're lucky, you only get a little sick. If you're unlucky, you learn a new way to boil herbs. Historians often debate whether peasant diets were truly unhealthy or just unbearably monotonous. The answer is yes. Your diet keeps you alive, but not radiant. You're not glowing with vitality. You're not thriving. You're surviving. You're chewing on barley like it owes you money. Here's a delightful footnote. In some villages, trenchers were used. Old, stale bread used as plates. You'd ladle stew onto the bread, eat the stew, then eat the soggy plate if you were hungry enough. Sometimes the trenchers went to the poor, sometimes to the pigs, sometimes to the family member who talked the least during dinner. You've eaten worse. A few families own pigs, not many. Pigs are valuable and dangerous, loud, nosy, surprisingly good at escape. But if you can keep one fed until winter, the rewards are enormous. Salted fat, smoked meat, rendered lard. One pig becomes a dozen meals, a few favors, and at least 3 stories. Fish, if you can get it, is a marvel. If you live near a stream or pond, you've tried your luck. If not, you depend on traders, saints, or smuggling. Some rivers belong to the Lord. No joke. Fish from those are taxed. If you get caught fishing without permission, the fine is real, or worse. So you fish quietly, at dusk, near the reeds, using a stick and some hope. The church doesn't help either. No meat on Fridays, or during Lent, or during fasting periods, which arrive more often than the harvest. You adapt. Eggs, dairy, dried beans. One particularly creative bishop even classified beaver tails as fish. No one argued. Tails meant calories. Calories meant warmth. And warmth is gold. Milk is tricky. It spoils quickly, especially in summer. You use it fast. Turn it into cheese or butter if you can. Cheese lasts longer. Butter, if you're lucky, stays edible for a week. Rancid butter is a thing you pretend doesn't exist until it's all that's left. You've learned how to cut around mold, how to tell the difference between aged and possessed. You've eaten cheese hard enough to chip a tooth. You've sucked marrow from bones that barely remember the animal they came from. And you've done it all without complaint. Because food is survival. It's also culture. And for you, it's the language of resilience. There's no "what's for dinner" here. There's only what's still left. You clean your fingers on your tunic. The fire is down to coals now. The dog shifts in his sleep, paws twitching, probably dreaming about bread. You look into the pot. Still some left. Enough for morning. You pull your cloak tighter. The wind brushes the shutters. Someone coughs softly. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you picture a world with tables of plenty, wine that flows, bread that softens without effort, a city with spices, a kitchen without smoke. Then you smile to yourself. You've got stew, you've got bread, and you've made it through another day. That's enough. The air smells faintly of smoke and mud when you wake, which means everything is working as it should. You've developed an instinct for this place. Your life is half routine, half reaction. You know the difference between someone's burning wood and someone's house is on fire. Today, it's just the hearth, Maybe a bit too much damp straw tossed on top. You'll fix it later. Everything gets fixed later. Except taxes. Taxes are always right now. Word spreads fast. The steward is coming today. Not soon. Not maybe. Today. The warning arrives with all the ceremony of a passing cough. Someone saw the edge of a cloak beyond the ridge. Someone heard boots. Someone else swears they smelled vinegar, which, oddly enough, seems like something a steward would smell like. You don't panic, you prepare, which mostly means moving things around, not hiding, just relocating. The good turnips get moved under the bad ones. The goat that was supposed to be lost gets moved 2 huts over. You scrape extra soot on the floor to make the house look slightly worse. It's a strange strategy, looking poorer than you are. But it works. The poorer you seem, the less interesting your ledger is. When the steward arrives, the entire village breathes through clenched teeth. He doesn't knock. He doesn't greet. He enters like a sneeze, abrupt, uncomfortable, and followed by silence. He's tall, of course. Everyone with power seems to be tall, even if they're not. He carries a small ledger, a charcoal nub, and the absolute confidence of someone who has never dug a latrine. He does not smile. He begins his circuit, 1 hut at a time, asking questions, counting livestock, measuring grain sacks with his eyes, asking how many children you have, not because he cares, but because he wants to know when they're old enough to work. He pauses before your home, looks at the roof, looks at you, doesn't say anything. That's either good or bad. You're not sure. Inside, he steps over the threshold like he's afraid of catching peasant. His boots leave perfect prints on the floor. He looks at the pot, the drying herbs, the straw-filled beds. He raises 1 eyebrow. You pretend not to notice. How many hens? 3. You actually have 5. Any pigs? No, steward. That's true. You traded the last one for boots last winter. Worst trade you ever made. The boots fell apart after a month. You still wear them. It's the principle. He marks something in his ledger. Scratching sound is sharp and final. You feel poorer just hearing it. Then comes the collection. Grain, measured in tenths, the Lord's share. It's not optional. You give a sack that's mostly barley, a bit of chaff on top. He doesn't check too closely. He's got other huts to visit. A sigh escapes your lips without your permission. That's dangerous. He glances up. You fake a cough. He moves on. Outdoors, the steward continues his route. You hear him arguing with Marjorie. She swears her sheep was stolen. He doesn't care. He wants wool, not excuses. You hear the word fine. You hear the word recorded. Marjorie will pay in eggs next week, or firewood, or silence. The steward is not the Lord, but he is the arm of the Lord, which means he can reach out and take. And if you resist, well, there are other arms, bigger ones, with swords. Historians call this feudal obligation. It sounds reasonable, almost contractual, but it's not a contract. It's a chain made of habits, fear, and dirt. You give because your father gave, and because your son will give, and because somewhere, deep down, you've stopped wondering if there's another way. There's a popular theory among scholars that peasants didn't actually hate their lords, not because they were fond of them, but because they never expected anything else. Resentment requires hope. You require stew. Here's a fun tidbit. Some manners charged for using the communal oven. Yes, even baking bread was taxable. If you were caught baking at home to avoid the fee, you could be fined, or shamed, or worse, your bread could be confiscated, which is tragic, and somehow hilarious. As the steward leaves, you watch his back like it's carrying away something that once belonged to you. He doesn't turn around, just walks the path, boots sharp against the earth, cloak swinging slightly with each step. He doesn't run. He doesn't need to. No one chases power when it leaves. They just hope it doesn't come back soon. You gather your tools again. Go back to your work. The fields don't care about ledgers. The goats don't understand taxes. The fence is still leaning. The stew is still bubbling. Your father mutters something about a wasted sack of barley. Your mother shushes him. Your brother kicks a stone. You all move on. This is the rhythm. Give, bow, work, repeat. But later, when the sun dips and the fire's lit and the house smells of ash and turnips, your sister laughs at something, a real laugh, the kind that cracks the ceiling a bit. You feel it. Just for a moment. The ledger's weight lifted an inch. Historians still argue whether peasants had joy or merely contentment. They argue a lot. You think they've never shared garlic stew with someone who gives you the bigger slice of bread without asking. Outside, the steward's footprints begin to fade in the dirt. That feels like a kind of victory. By the time the steward's shadow is out of sight, the village begins to exhale. Slow, subtle, like a sigh you didn't know you were holding. No one celebrates. That would be foolish. But the tension slips out of your shoulders, and the air inside your chest expands a little wider. For now, at least, the ledger is closed. For now, your barley is your own. You lean back against the wall of your hut, letting the fading sun warm your face. Across the path, old Tom picks at a loose thatch above his door. It won't hold through the next storm, but he patches it anyway. You respect the effort? In this village, effort is half the miracle. The rest of the evening plays out like most. Quiet chores, quiet meals, quiet conversation. But something else moves beneath it. A deeper current, older than taxes or turnips. You feel it when your mother lights the oil lamp, not because it's needed, but because it's habit. She crosses herself before doing it. Your sister follows, wordlessly. You do too, more out of rhythm than belief. Because here, the church is not a place. It's the weather. It's the background hum of existence. And faith? Faith is a muscle you don't think about until it aches. Mass is held only when the traveling priest arrives, usually once every few months. He shows up in a worn robe smelling like candle wax and old vellum, his voice worn soft by Latin and dust. You never understand the words. No one does. But the cadence is familiar. Comforting even. Latin flows over you like rain. You don't need to catch every drop to know you've been washed. You remember your last confession. You admitted to using the Lord's name improperly while trying to untangle a goat. The priest sighed. He'd heard worse. He gave you penance, 3 prayers, and a promise not to curse at livestock again. You've mostly succeeded. Mostly. But confession isn't about clarity. It's about weight. You carry so many burdens, wood, water, harvests, debts. It helps to set some of them down, even if only for a few whispered minutes. Faith weaves through everything. Your calendar isn't by months, but by saints' days. You don't say mid-July. You say just after St. Swithin. Easter marks the planting season. St. Michael's marks the harvest. You don't plan your life around the stars. You plan it around who might be watching from them. Even your meals bend to the church's will. No meat on Fridays, no butter during Lent, fasting on feast days, celebrating after fasting, a rhythm of denial and reward, timed with Scripture. You've never questioned it. You wouldn't know how. Historians debate whether medieval peasants understood church doctrine or simply followed it blindly. Honestly, you're not sure there's a difference. You don't understand the Latin, but you know when to kneel. You don't know the finer points of theology, but you know how to cross yourself before passing a shrine. You don't know why the bread is sacred, but you've seen what happens when someone drops it. And here's a peculiar detail. Some communities believed if you fell asleep during Mass, your soul could wander too far and not return. So people tied bits of yarn around their fingers, like spiritual seatbelts. Your family keeps a small relic, though you're not sure how real it is. A strip of cloth, supposedly from St. Cuthbert's robe. It smells like old sheep and ash. You keep it near the hearth anyway, just in case. Faith, after all, doesn't require evidence, just repetition. You once heard a story. A boy from a village nearby saw an angel during a thunderstorm. The angel told him not to eat beans for 7 days. He didn't. Then his sister stopped coughing. Coincidence? Maybe. But no one's eaten beans during storms since. Tonight, your mother mumbles a prayer over the pot before ladling out dinner. Your brother traces a cross in the ash with his finger. Your sister braids her hair and ties it with a strip of cloth blessed by a traveling friar last spring. None of it guarantees safety, but none of it hurts either. And then, there's death. The church does death best. You've seen it. When someone's fading, the priest is summoned. If he's near, he brings oil, words, peace. If he's not, someone else steps in. A neighbor, a cousin, someone who remembers the right words. Last rites don't require a degree, just presence. You've whispered prayers over the dying. You've helped dig graves that were too shallow in soil too hard. You've watched as candles flickered beside cooling hands and breath slowed until it didn't. You don't cry much, not because you're hardened, but because grief here is practical. Mourning happens around chores, around stew, around broken fences. You keep moving. You light the candle. You say the name. Because if you stop saying their names, who will? And when someone dies, you pay the church. You pay in grain, eggs, wax. Sometimes coin, though coin is rare. Why? Because the soul doesn't move on without help. It lingers in purgatory, a hallway of shadows between here and whatever comes next. You shorten its stay with prayer, with offerings, with faith. And when it's your turn, you hope your family will do the same. The church doesn't offer comfort, it offers structure. And structure is more valuable than hope. Hope fades, structure survives. It survives fire, famine, and time, like the stone chapels that outlast the people who built them. You look to the crucifix above the hearth. It's crude, carved by your uncle long ago. The eyes are uneven. The wood is cracked. But the gesture is clear. Someone once believed. Now you do too. Or at least you behave like you do. And here's the thing. In this village, behavior is belief. You kneel when told. You fast when required. You light candles on saint days. You wear your faith like a tunic, worn, practical, stained, but always there. Outside, the wind shifts. You hear a barn door rattle. You whisper a prayer without thinking. Not for protection, just for rhythm. The next morning greets you with a sharp, sudden cough. Not yours, but your cousin's, hacking from the other side of the room like he's trying to exercise his lungs. You lie still, listening. It's not the dry, dusty cough from smoke or straw. It's wet. That kind that sticks in the air long after the sound fades. You've heard it before, and you don't like what it means. You sit up. The room is cold again, but that's not what makes your skin prickle. It's the silence between the coughs. Everyone else heard it too. No one says anything. No one needs to. Sickness has a smell, sour, slow, and growing. You light a bit of dried sage, wave it through the air. Your mother mumbles a prayer. Your brother touches the relic cloth again. You check your cousin's forehead, hot, eyes glassy, breathing shallow. This could be nothing. A chill from the draft, a touch of bad grain, or it could be the beginning of something that swallows the village whole. Illness here isn't dramatic, like stories in books. It's slow, creeping, and terribly efficient. You've seen it. You've seen children with runny noses one day and buried the next. You've seen strong men stumble in the field and never stand again. You've seen a woman miscarry, not from accident or injury, but from fever alone. And the worst part isn't the sickness, it's the helplessness. No medicine, no diagnosis, just herbs, hope, and time. You don't know what it is. You don't even have a word for it. Could be the flux, could be the ague, could be something nameless. There are only so many ways to describe not getting better. You boil water, drop in thyme and a piece of root you're half sure isn't poisonous. You hold the cup to your cousin's lips. He sips, barely. That's your treatment. Warmth, prayers, and plants you found near a stump 2 seasons ago. Historians call it medieval medicine, but it's not medicine. It's tradition. It's belief. And sometimes it works. There's an old woman at the edge of the village, half healer, half heretic. People go to her in the dark, wrapped in cloaks and shame. She has salves, charms, bones tied in thread, and dried frogs for reasons she doesn't explain. You've gone to her once, when your sister had a fever that wouldn't break. She gave you a poultice that smelled like vinegar and regret. Your sister got better. You don't know if the frog helped. You don't ask. Today, though, you can't leave. If others know your cousin's ill, they might shun your home. And not out of cruelty, out of fear. Sickness spreads fast. You've seen whole families vanish within weeks. The earth outside your village is soft with memory. You still remember the plague. Not the big one, not the Black Death they sing about. A smaller one, more localized. Your father called it the dark wind. It came one spring when the air was too still. People began to cough, then bleed, then disappear into silence. You buried 7 people in 2 weeks. No funerals, no last rites, just dirt and tears and an overwhelming desire to forget. You never really forgot. Today's illness may be nothing. You cling to that. But you wash your hands in ashes and water anyway. You whisper a saint's name under your breath. You hang garlic by the door. Your cousin moans, and your mother wipes his brow. He sleeps. You don't. The rest of the village keeps moving. Because it must. A sick family doesn't pause the harvest. Chickens still lay. Fences still fall. Life continues, whether you're ready or not. You head outside, the sky gray and low, like it wants to rain, but hasn't committed yet. You walk the narrow path to the well, fetching water in a bucket patched with pitch. Every drop feels heavier than usual. Not physically, emotionally. You carry it back like it might solve something. In the distance, you hear someone coughing too. Not your cousin, someone else. You don't know whether to be relieved or terrified. And here's the irony. Sometimes, illness is your only break. If you're sick, you don't work. You lie down. People feed you, pity you. It's almost indulgent, until it isn't. Until your lips crack and your hands tremble, and you start whispering things you don't remember later. Some people fake illness. They wrap bandages around perfectly fine ankles. They limp slightly during tax season. But that only works once, maybe twice. After that, the steward stops asking questions and starts taking more. When real sickness comes, it doesn't ask permission. It knocks you down mid-step. It whispers through families like a rumor. It doesn't matter how strong you are, how faithful, how cautious. You can wash your hands in wine and still fall ill. You can avoid frogs and still collapse. You think of the stories about people touched by God and never getting sick again, about holy wells, miraculous springs, a woman who cured 100 villagers with a feather and a prayer. You wonder why those stories never happen here. Maybe the feather got lost. Historians still argue about how peasants coped with epidemics. Some say they turned to religion. Others say they turned to folklore. You say they turned to whatever was closest. Candle, cloth, hope. Back inside, your cousin stirs. His fever is lower, his breathing deeper. You exhale finally. It's not over, but it's something. Your mother lights a candle, not for the saint, but for the light. She places it near the doorway to remind the dark that you're still here. You sit beside your cousin, wrap the blanket tighter around him, and tell him a story he won't remember. Not to help him sleep, but to remind yourself that not every day ends in grief. Sometimes they just end, and for now, that's enough. Rain begins with a whisper, almost shy, a few droplets on the roof, a shift in the wind, a pause in bird song. Then the sky opens, not angry, not violent, just persistent. A steady, soaking curtain of water that makes the air feel heavier than usual. You press your hand against the doorframe and feel the moisture working its way into the wood like it always does. You sigh. Rain means different things, depending on the season. In spring, it means promise. In summer, it means relief. But in autumn, or worse, in late autumn, it means risk. Risk of mold, risk of rot, risk that the soil will never dry, in time to plant next year's barley. Too much rain can kill just as efficiently as none. You step outside in your patched cloak, hood over your brow. The air smells like damp earth and old stone. Puddles already form in the ruts of the path. Your boots squelch. You keep walking because the animals don't care about the rain. The goats still need feeding. The chickens still need checking. And the thatch you were supposed to fix 3 days ago is now dripping onto the only dry part of the floor. Rain means work. But worse, it means uncertainty. You glance up at the clouds, gray, heavy, endless. There's a superstition in your village that rain like this means the saints are grieving. For what? No one agrees. Maybe a lost soul, maybe the harvest, maybe just boredom. But when the sky cries, people get nervous, and they have every right to be. You've seen what a bad season does. Not a bad day, not a missed chore. A season when the crops don't ripen, or ripen too soon. When blight takes the barley, when rust stains the wheat, when hail shreds the cabbage patch in one afternoon, when you pour your sweat into the field and it shrugs in return. And when that happens, hunger arrives. Not the sharp, sudden hunger of a missed meal, the long, dull, aching hunger that wears you down week by week. That turns stew watery, that turns bones visible, that turns people into quieter versions of themselves. You remember a season like that. You were younger, the wheat rotted early, the Lord's taxes didn't adjust. So people adjusted instead. Less bread, more weeds. Some found mushrooms, others found nothing. One family left. No word, no goodbye. Just an empty hut and a broken fence. You still wonder what happened to them. Another family didn't leave, but they weren't the same by spring. Famine doesn't just thin bodies, it thins relationships. People stop sharing, stop laughing. They hoard onions and stop mentioning the beans drying in the rafters. They hide meat like secrets, and they pray more. Because famine isn't a problem to solve, it's a weight to carry. Every decision becomes ethical and existential. Do you eat now or save for tomorrow? Do you feed the child or the elder? Do you sell your boots or your blanket? Do you tell the truth about what's left? Rain pounds the roof harder now, like it wants in. Inside, your mother adds more water to the pot, not because it needs it, but because it needs to last. Your sister grinds acorns into flour. It's bitter, but it stretches the dough. Your brother counts turnips. Again, you've learned how to quiet a stomach, not with food, but with distraction, with stories, with tea, with faith. Some say the monks in the abbey downriver keep grains in secret cellars, deep beneath stone floors and iron locks. Some say they'll never go hungry. Some say they'd rather starve than beg. You wonder which you are. Historians still argue whether famine was as widespread as the chronicles suggest. They debate whether the monks helped, whether the lords cared, whether the peasants exaggerated. You don't care. You lived it. Or rather, you survived it. That's the more accurate word. There was a year the barley flour was so full of weevils that people baked with it anyway, picked out the worst, ate the rest. And the only joke that winter was more protein. You didn't laugh, but you smiled, because smiling feels like resistance. That year, someone stole a sack of oats from the steward's barn. He punished 3 families just to make sure he got the thief. You weren't the thief, but you still gave up your hen. Some people died quietly, others loudly. Some just left their fields one day and never came back. Their huts were swallowed by vines by spring. But you stayed, and you learned. You learned that nettles can be soup, that pine bark can be boiled into porridge, that hunger changes how you define food. You once roasted crow. You once drank hot water with grass in it and called it broth. You once fasted 3 days and said it was for St. Bridget. Maybe it was, but you never forgot how it felt. That empty, distant pull. The way your ribs seemed to echo. The way your legs got slow. The way the world narrowed to one question. Is there more? Tonight, it rains harder, and though your larder is not yet empty, the sound brings back the memory. You light a second candle. You put a second log on the fire, not for warmth, for reassurance. And you pray the rain knows when to stop. By dawn, the rain has stopped, but the world outside your door isn't celebrating. It's soggy, sullen, a mess of mud and regret. You step outside and nearly lose a boot to the sucking pull of wet earth. The sky is lighter, sure, but not brighter. Just a washed-out gray, like parchment left too long in the sun. You squint toward the fields, what's left of them anyway. The barley leans like tired soldiers. The paths are rivers, and where your neighbor's pigsty once stood, there's now a pit of standing water and a very confused pig. You sigh again. Sighing has become your second language. Time to rebuild. But before you can even start, there's a knock, not a steward's knock. This one is gentler, familiar. It's Alric. Broad shoulders, mud to the knees, and an apologetic look you've come to recognize. He needs help. His fence has collapsed. His goat wandered off. His thatch is leaking, and he hasn't seen his youngest since before the rain. Don't worry. He turns up later, behind the chicken coop, asleep next to a sack of wet wool. So you go. Because here's the rule: no one writes down, but everyone follows. When something breaks, you fix it together. In this village, community isn't optional. It's air. You don't survive alone. Not in a world with taxes, storms, blight, and flu. You survive because when your roof caves in, someone else lifts the beam. Because when your hands shake too much to knead the dough, someone else does it for you. Because when your child cries and you've run out of lullabies, your neighbor sings instead. That's the magic here. Quiet, consistent, communal. You and Alric patch the fence. He thanks you by handing over a loaf of bread his wife made yesterday. Still warm somehow. You split it between you, standing in the mud, chewing like kings. The rain may have stolen the dry ground, but it didn't steal this. Later, you help Marjorie dig a trench to drain her garden. You carry firewood to the widow by the chapel. You throw a sack of moldy straw into the river and hope it doesn't find its way back. This is the unspoken social contract. Help today, be helped tomorrow. It's not charity, it's strategy. You're building a web of debts without numbers, of favors without ledgers. Historians call it the moral economy, a way peasants regulated fairness outside the Lord's control. You call it normal. But of course, it's not all harmony and hay bales. Petty squabbles bloom like mushrooms after rain. Who trampled whose onions? Who borrowed a rake and never returned it? Who flirted with whose cousin behind the bakery? The drama is endless and often ridiculous, but it never tips into disaster. Because when the steward returns, or the rains come again, or the barn catches fire, all those grudges get stuffed into a sack and stored for later. You remember the time Gervais called your brother a lazy ox with half a brain. Your brother said nothing, just helped her pull her cow out of the bog 2 days later. She never said thank you, but she started bringing him butter. After that, forgiveness is quiet here. It's not in words, it's in loaves, in blankets, in shared work and silent nods. You've come to admire that. The way people here let things simmer, but never boil. And when tensions do rise, there's the alehouse. Ah, yes, the village alehouse. Part tavern, part court, part confession booth. A single room with warped benches, sticky floors, and a barrel that leaks just enough to be trusted. It's where gossip ferments, laughter echoes, and arguments dissolve in foam. Tonight, after the worst of the work is done, you go. You sit beside men and women with dirt under their nails and stories in their bones. You sip something dark and vaguely bitter. It's probably watered down. No one cares. You listen to a story about a goose that chased a tax collector out of a nearby village. You hear a debate about whether St. Cuthbert or St. Cecilia would win in a foot race. You laugh, not because it's funny, because it's safe to laugh again. This is the pulse of your village, Not the fields, not the church, not the taxes. The people, their hands, their jokes, their grief. Even now, you see it. Two young men arm wrestling in the corner, their rivalry stretching back 3 harvests. The miller's wife trying to trade a comb for firewood. The old man who tells the same story every week. And everyone still listens. You take another sip. You close your eyes. You feel, for a moment, like this is enough. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were happy. It's a loaded word. You don't have time for happiness. But you have contentment. You have relief. You have company. And honestly, that might be more valuable. As you step outside, the stars are peeking out, shy after so many days of cloud. The mud is still deep, but the wind smells clean. You hear a frog. That feels promising. You head home. Tomorrow, someone else will need help. Tomorrow, you'll give it. Or maybe you'll be the one asking. It doesn't matter, because in this world of mud and tax and prayer and goats, you are never alone. The stars fade slowly, retreating behind a pale veil of morning mist. You wake to the sound of footsteps outside, light ones, like someone tiptoeing through damp grass. It's your sister, already gathering eggs before the sun's fully up. She's humming, not loudly, just enough to remind the world that she's still here. You stretch your arms, feel the familiar ache of yesterday's labor in your shoulders. Every day begins this way. Aches, cold, breath, then movement. Always movement. Today is market day. Market day doesn't happen often. It's not a weekly event, more like a blessing that happens when the stars, roads, and weather all cooperate. The nearest proper market is 2 villages and a river away, and today it's dry enough to risk the trip. You pack what little you have, a small wheel of cheese, a handful of eggs, 2 worn combs carved from bone, and a bundle of herbs your mother swears will keep mice out of the grain. You load them into a basket lined with straw, sling it over your shoulder, and start walking. The path to market is more than a road. It's a window into other lives, other rumors, other possibilities. You pass a man pushing a cart full of turnips. You greet him. He grunts. You both keep walking. The journey takes hours. Your boots pick up half the road, and by the time the market tents come into view, your legs feel like pudding. But your eyes light up every time. Color, noise, movement. Market day is a feast for the senses, even if you can't afford to feast. Spices you've never tasted hang in open sacks. Copperware gleams under the gray sky. Foreign fabrics, likely from someone who took a boat longer than your whole village, shimmer on display. A juggler tosses knives dangerously close to a toddler, and no one seems alarmed. A woman with missing teeth sells songs for pennies. A pig escapes its leash and runs straight through a cart of apples. You laugh. You can't help it. You find your spot near the ale barrel and lay out your goods. Nothing fancy, just arranged in a way that suggests you care. You greet passers-by. Some nod, some don't. Some pick up your combs and grunt. One man sniffs your herbs and sneezes dramatically. You trade 3 eggs for a small tin of lamp oil. You barter the cheese for thread. The combs go to a traveler who says he's bound for York. He overpays, maybe out of pity. You don't argue. It's not about profit. It's about exchange. A woman next to you offers lacework so delicate, it looks like snow. You ask how she made it. She tells you, then asks where you're from. You talk. For 5 minutes. maybe 10. You've never seen her before. You may never again. But for those few minutes, you're more than a laborer. You're a person with a name and a story. That's the true gift of market day. Yes, the trade matters, but the real value is the reminder. Your village is not the whole world. You hear news too. News travels, traders, faster than rain on a slate roof. There's talk of rebellion in the north, of a monastery burned down, of a new tax coming next spring, of a boy born with 2 thumbs on one hand, clearly blessed or cursed, depending on the storyteller. Historians still debate the accuracy of peasant knowledge. Some think you lived in a fog, unaware of the kingdom beyond your fields. But you know better. Stories move faster than roads. They travel in baskets and songs, in the mouths of drunk traders and worried nuns. You learn today that a new law may limit who can sell grain. Something about guilds, something about rights. You don't fully understand it, but you understand enough to feel nervous. You tuck that knowledge away, like a coin. Maybe you'll spend it later. Maybe it'll save you. Midday, you eat a crust of bread while sitting on a stone. You watch the market swirl around you. It feels alive, chaotic, indulgent, like a festival with no saints. You spot a child stealing a pear. You look away, not because you approve, but because you understand. You make one last trade, a bundle of herbs for a worn book with no cover. You can't read. Not well. But your sister can make out a few words, and your cousin swears he knows Latin when he's drunk. It'll be something to puzzle over by the fire. As the sun tips west, you gather your basket. Now lighter in weight, but heavier in value. You walk home tired, but content. The mist returns, curling low over the fields. You feel the tug of home, the way you always do after a day away. Familiar smells, familiar creaks, familiar chores. When you reach your village, your brother is waiting, arms crossed. "Did you bring back anything edible?" he asks. You toss him a bruised apple. He grins anyway. Inside, your mother unpacks your trades with a look of approval, disguised as indifference. Your sister opens the book, squints at the faded ink. "I think this says, virtue, maybe?" You nod. Good enough. You light the lamp with your precious oil. You sit by the hearth. You listen to the sounds of your home, scraping, stirring, soft laughter, and you think the world is wider than you can see. But this corner of it, is yours. You wake before the rooster, not because you want to, but because today is tithe day. It comes around 4 times a year, like a ritual, and no matter how many times you prepare, it still feels like a small funeral, not of a person, but of your control. You dress simply, not out of modesty, but because the finer tunic might imply you're hiding wealth. That would not go over well with the reeve. The church collects its 10th, a tithe from every family, 1/10 of your grain, your eggs, your cider, your hay, even your bees, if they've been productive. If your soul is to be saved, it will apparently require some cheese and a bundle of leeks. You load your cart, careful not to bruise the apples. Every scratch is a reason for the priest to frown and take more. Your mother slips a small piece of soap into the cart. A gift, she says, a peace offering. She's learned, over time, that offerings taste sweeter when sugared. As you trudge toward the tithe barn, you pass your neighbors doing the same. The air is quiet, not reverent, just tense, like a village-wide exhale that never finishes. The tithe barn looms ahead, wide and dark, larger than your chapel, bigger than your house, and built with the kind of stone meant to outlast memory. You queue up behind a woman with a limp and ahead of a boy who's definitely underage for taxes, but carrying a basket heavier than he is. His father probably sent him instead. Inside, the air smells of dust, mildew, and obligation. The church clerk greets you with a nod and a quill. He writes your name in the ledger, then inspects your offerings like a disappointed chef. He taps the wheel of cheese, weighs the bag of barley, sniffs the cider. You say nothing. You never say anything. He grunts approval. You place your goods in the appropriate bins. You back away. Done. But before you leave, the priest steps forward. He blesses your family. Standard words, rehearsed so often they've lost their edges. You say, Amen, at the right time. You bow. You exit. No one speaks until they're outside. Some complain, quietly. Others spit in the dirt. One man jokes that the church's stomach is bigger than God's. He gets a few chuckles, nervous ones. Tithe Day is not just economic, it's spiritual accounting. The church gives you a place in the afterlife, in theory. You give them grain in return. In fact, historians still debate whether the tithe was a burden or a blessing. You know the answer? Both. It supported the sick, the orphaned, chapel roof. But it also took your butter and left you eating oatcakes. It's complicated. Some call it theft in robes, others call it structure. You call it unavoidable. Back home, you find the larder noticeably lighter. Your mother nods, tight-lipped. Your sister starts baking, compensating with turnip mash and clever seasoning. Brother mutters about holy greed. But no one revolts. Not because they agree, because revolt is expensive. You've heard of villages that refused to tithe. Some were fined, others were punished. One had its chapel closed for months, the dead buried without rites, the babies christened by grandmothers, whispering Latin syllables they barely remembered. You can't afford that. No one can. And to be fair, yes, fair, the church sometimes gives back. There are feast days with bread and wine and songs. There are blessings for the fields, holy water sprinkled over seeds and soil. Once, a priest healed a man's boils with nothing but prayer and goose grease. Maybe that was luck, maybe that was God. No one really knows. Tonight, after the tithe, there's a service. Everyone attends, not for penance, for presence. The priest delivers a sermon. You don't follow every word, but the rhythm is soothing. He talks about sacrifice, about giving, about eternal reward. You look around the chapel, wooden benches, a cracked fresco of Saint Sebastian, candles flickering, faces weary but familiar. And for a moment, you feel something close to peace. Not joy, not satisfaction, just peace. The kind that comes from knowing the day is over, the duty fulfilled, the roof still holding. You leave the chapel and step into the night. The stars are sharp, the wind cool. You walk home slower than usual. Not because you're tired, but because you want the quiet to last a little longer. Back at the hearth, your mother hands you a bowl of stew. Thin but warm. You eat slowly. You talk about nothing important. Your cousin jokes that if heaven's entry fee is 10% of a goat, he'd rather be reincarnated as a rabbit. You laugh, because today you paid your price. You played the part. You bent the knee, kissed the ring, and handed over your share. And you survived. Sometimes that's the holiest act of all. The days grow shorter now, and you feel it. Not just in the chill that creeps in before supper, but in the bones of the village itself. Everything tightens. Windows get stuffed with cloth. Doors creak shut faster. Voices grow softer, as though wasting breath is a luxury. Winter is coming, but before it arrives with full force, there is one last event to mark the turning: the Feast of All Saints. It is not just a religious day. It is the hinge between seasons, the day where the living honor the dead, and the dead, in rumor at least, walk a little closer. You help your sister gather rushes for the candles. You help your mother peel root vegetables. The whole village feels like it's holding its breath, not in fear, but in remembrance. You don't have many saints here, not in the official sense, but you have stories, lots of stories. The woman who walked through plague and never got sick, the man who pulled 6 children from a burning hut, the boy who climbed the church spire to fix the bell and then fell, only to get up and walk away with nothing but a limp. Maybe saints, maybe lucky, maybe both. Today their names are whispered again. You gather in the chapel before dusk. Everyone holds a candle. The light wavers like hope. The priest speaks slowly. His Latin rolls over you like smoke. You don't catch every word, but you don't need to. You know the meaning. He names the saints of the church. But then, one by one, the villagers start adding their own names. Local ones, family ones, yours. Your father's name is said aloud, and for a moment, the grief you buried under chores and winters and years rises up in your throat. But you don't cry. You squeeze your sister's hand instead. She doesn't cry either, but her grip tightens. Outside, the wind rises. Leaves rattle. Somewhere, a dog barks. It's not scary. It's thin, like the world is wearing less skin tonight. After the service, people gather for a modest feast. Not grand, warm. Bread, broth, cabbage, spiced with whatever they could afford. There's laughter, but it's quieter. Like everyone knows they're sharing the table with memory. You sit by the fire and listen to an elder recount a tale you've heard before. Something about a ghost in the well. It's half truth, half warning, half entertainment, and somehow still whole. Historians still argue how seriously medieval people took these beliefs. Were they superstitious, rational, performing traditions without meaning? You know the truth. They believed in layers, in things seen and unseen, in the idea that some nights the veil between those layers thinned. And whether or not it's true, it matters, because belief creates ritual, and ritual holds people together. Tonight, the children place bread by the door, offerings for wandering souls. You used to do the same years ago. Part of you still wants to. You fall asleep that night with a candle still burning, just in case someone, something, needs light. Morning comes. No ghosts, just frost. Your breath puffs white as you chop wood. The logs crack like bones. You stack them neatly against the side of the house, hoping they'll last. Winter here isn't theatrical. It doesn't roar in like a monster. It seeps, slowly, patiently, like someone filling your boots with cold water, one drop at a time. And yet, there's something comforting about it. The stillness, the regularity, the way the world quiets down and shrinks to what's near. You'll spend the coming weeks spinning, mending, sharpening, airing. You'll watch the food stores more closely. You'll ration the butter. You'll argue about firewood. You'll also tell stories, drink warm things, play dice by firelight, laugh about nothing because the nights are long and the work is done. This season isn't easy, but it is necessary. because it forces you to be with your people, with your thoughts, with your past. And strangely, it's often in the deepest cold that you feel the deepest warmth. Tonight, you sit around the hearth. Your sister is darning a sock. Your cousin is whittling a spoon. Your mother hums a tune so old you think maybe it predates language. You're safe. For now. And that's all anyone here has ever truly asked for. You know it's going to be a strange day the moment you wake and realize it's too quiet. No chickens, no fire crackling, no gossip over water jugs, just a stillness that presses against your chest like fog. You rise, dress, and step outside, and immediately feel it. Something has shifted. The village is gathered, and that only happens when trouble arrives. At the well, a knot of neighbors huddles close. Faces pale, voices sharp, posture guarded. You push through gently, trying not to show the unease bubbling in your throat. Then you see him. The Reeve. His cloak is damp with morning dew, but his shoes are dry. He didn't walk here. He was sent. And behind him, 2 men with swords. Not soldiers exactly. Hired muscle. Enough to remind you who holds the ink on your taxes and the steel on your throat. The Reeve clears his throat, eyes scanning the crowd like a schoolmaster facing unruly children. There's been a decree, he says. The Baron requires additional tribute, immediate, grain, dried meat, iron tools if you have them, 2 wagons worth. No apology, no explanation, no compensation, just need delivered with authority. A murmur rises, low at first, then gaining speed. Not anger yet, just confusion, disbelief, fear. You see your neighbor Thomas shift uneasily. He lost half his barley to rot last month. Marjorie tightens her shawl. Her only goat gave birth stillborn. And the smith? The smith stares straight ahead, jaw tight. His daughter just recovered from the fever, and his forge hasn't been lit in 4 days due to lack of charcoal. The Reeve raises a hand. You have until dusk tomorrow, then the wagons come. He turns without ceremony and departs, his guards flanking him like shadows. No one speaks for a long moment. Then someone spits. Not at anyone, just into the dirt, but it says enough. You head home, but the silence follows. And as the day goes on, the village begins to unravel in quiet rebellion. No one says the word. Rebellion is a fire no one dares light, but the questions are there. Where does it end? Someone mutters over lunch. They take what they want, another says, and we thank them for it. And someone else, braver or more tired, simply says, what if we say no? It doesn't feel like sedition. It feels like honesty, like someone finally exhaling after holding their breath all year. That night, you sit by the fire. The bread is thinner, the broth more water than root. But there's warmth. Your family huddles close, and you whisper the thing you've been thinking all day. Maybe we don't give it. Your sister looks up, startled, but then nods, because what's left to lose? The next day, you meet in the chapel, not to pray, but to plan. Carefully, quietly. 6 heads bowed not to saints, but to strategy. The decision is made. They will offer mock tribute, a message, not with blades, but with humor and refusal. They fill the baskets with stones, wrap dry straw in cloth and call it meat. Slip forged iron nails into sacks labeled grain. It's foolish, it's bold, it's dangerous, but it's also the only thing that's felt like agency in months. When the Baron's wagons arrive the next morning, the villagers are waiting, calm, organized, defiant, in that special way only the poor can manage, with a straight back and nothing to lose. The steward takes one look into the baskets and goes red with fury. "This is mockery," he hisses. "No," says Beatrix, the old woman who hasn't stood tall in years. "This is all we have left. It's a lie, but it's one born of truth." The guards step forward. The threat is clear. They could take more than food. They could take people. But no one flinches, not even the children. The steward snarls and leaves, promising punishment, and he delivers. By sundown, 2 pigs are taken. 3 stores are raided. The chapel doors are locked. No one is arrested. Yet. But the message is clear. Still, something is different. The village gathers again. This time, not to scheme, but to stand. And as you look around, you realize, for all that's been taken, something has been returned. Your voice, not a loud one, not a noble one, but a real one. You remember tales of rebellion, the peasants' revolt, the jacquerie, stories told in hushed tones and pub corners. Historians still debate their causes, their successes, whether they were sparks or smoke. But here's what they miss. Resistance isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about remembering you can resist. The days after are hard. Food runs lower. Fear lingers. A traveling friar stops by and warns of sin, of pride, of consequences. But he leaves without collecting alms. And the village breathes again. Your mother bakes an extra loaf and gives it to the smith. Your sister mends a cloak for a boy whose father had his tools seized. And someone, no one knows who, leaves fresh milk on the chapel steps. The locks on the doors are still there, but the spirit of the people has passed through something. You go to sleep one night and realize you are no longer just enduring. You are choosing to feed each other, not just yourselves. Choosing to defend dignity, not just survival. And you dream, not of fields or pigs or taxes, but of silence broken by laughter. The good kind. The kind that says, "We're still here." Winter has arrived, not with a storm, but with a steady closing of doors and shortening of days. The wind no longer dances. It pushes. The cold doesn't bite playfully. It burrows. And your breath, once invisible, now trails behind you like a ghost of everything warm you've lost since harvest. You rise before dawn, because dawn itself has grown lazy. It comes later now, dragging its heels behind thick clouds. Inside your cottage, everything is wrapped in layers: cloth, straw, silence. You step outside into the frost-hardened world. The earth crunches. The trees are skeletal. The village feels like a sketch of itself, lines without color, shape without spirit. Smoke curls from chimneys, slow and tentative. Food is tighter now. You've long since eaten the last of the apples. The bread is made with barley, not wheat. Coarser, heavier. Dried beans stretch further than you thought possible, but even they are running low. A single onion becomes a treasure, a spoon of lard, a luxury. But you do what all peasants do in winter. You make do, and not just with food. You mend everything: clothes, tools, spirits. You tell old stories, not because they're useful, but because they're warm. You sit by the fire, what little fire you can afford, and pass the hours in a slow loop of chores and patience. Evenings are the same: quiet, dark, long. But in that darkness, something else happens. Something you forgot during the bustle of harvest and the panic of tithe season. You begin to reflect. Winter is when the world forces you to look inward. You think about the year. Who was born? who was buried, who disappeared. You think about the old priest who caught a fever and never woke up, about the boy who chased a fox and broke his leg, about your cousin who laughed for the first time in years when someone slipped on the ice. You think about you, what you've become, what you've survived. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had an inner life, whether you pondered your place in the world or just endured it, whether you could think beyond your belly and your barn. You want to laugh. Of course you do. How could you not? When your entire world balances on the edge of famine and faith, you learn to hold two thoughts at once, hope and fear. And so tonight, as snow begins to fall, soft, silent, stubborn, you find yourself gazing at the flakes. You hold one out on your glove, watch it melt. You whisper a prayer, not to saints or kings, but to the cold itself. Be kind. The next morning, something strange happens. A letter arrives. Not for you. Peasants don't get letters, but for the steward, delivered by a rider with a horse too clean for roads like yours. Rider stays no longer than needed, and when he's gone, a rumor spreads like fire in dry thatch. The Baron is dead. Dead. Just like that. A fever, they say, or poison, or maybe just age catching up. No one knows. No one trusts the tale. But the messenger wore the Baron's crest, and the steward was pale when he read the parchment. It doesn't mean freedom. Not yet. But it means change. A new era. A new system. Maybe chaos. Maybe opportunity. And for the first time in months, people begin talking about something other than survival. What if the new Baron is kinder? What if he forgets our debts? What if we ask for roads? What if he forgets us entirely? It's not rebellion. It's not celebration. But it is possibility. And in a village like yours, possibility is as rare and precious as gold. That night, you find yourself walking alone, past the chapel, past the fields, to the edge of the woods. You look up. The stars are sharp tonight, clear. Kind of sky that humbles and comforts all at once. You close your eyes, and you say something, not quite a wish, not quite a prayer, but a promise that you'll keep going, that you'll protect what little is yours, that you'll stay kind, even when the world forgets to be. And when you open your eyes, the wind shifts, just slightly, just enough to feel like someone heard you. You walk back slowly. Your boots crunch against the snow. Your fingers ache. But your heart? Your heart is warm. The sun is hesitant to rise these days, stretching its light only thinly across the frozen fields. You wake, not because you have to, but because habit is stronger than sleep. Your body is a clock wound by survival, and it keeps time, even in silence. You sit by the hearth. The fire is low, more ember than flame. Still, it gives enough light to see your breath. You warm your hands. They are cracked again, despite the fat you rubbed into the skin last night. Winter eats slowly, but it never misses a meal. But today is different. There's a feeling in the village. Not joy exactly, but motion. Like something waking up after a long nap. The reeve has called a gathering. That's rare. Usually news is passed from mouth to mouth, but today, he wants everyone. You join the crowd. The square is slushy from yesterday's sun, the mud trying to remember how to be soil. The reeve reads a proclamation. His voice isn't proud. It's unsure. The new Baron has been confirmed. A young man, barely older than you. And here's the surprise. He's forgiving the back taxes from the previous year. There's a silence. Not the silence of fear, of shock. Forgiven? Just like that? A few people laugh, some cry. The baker crosses herself. The smith mutters that the boy must have been dropped on his head. But you just stand still, letting it soak in. It won't change everything. Not the hunger, not the rot, not the cracked tools and aching backs, but it changes something. The tightness in your chest loosens a notch. Your shoulders feel less like armor, more like limbs again. You go home with the news on your lips, and that night, people celebrate, not with feasting. There's nothing to feast on, but with presents. Neighbors come over without reason. Someone brings a small jug of cider. Someone else plays a string of notes on a flute that hasn't been heard since midsummer. You talk. You remember. You laugh. You feel alive, not just surviving. And in that warmth, you realize something. You are not a footnote, not a shadow under a king's name. You are part of the story, the real one. The one made in thatched roofs and aching hands and long winters. The one that no historian will ever write down in full, because they weren't here. But you were. You are. Later that night, lying on your pallet, your belly not quite full, but not quite empty, you stare at the roof and imagine the future. Will your children live here? Will this Baron keep his promises? Will the river flood again? You don't know. You never will. But here's what you do know. You've made it through a year, a full year. You have paid your dues. You have worked your land. You have resisted, however softly. You have mourned, and you have hoped. And despite every reason not to, you have kept going. You reach for the small carved comb beside your bed. It's smooth now, worn by time and use. You think of the day you sold another one like it at the market, the first real coin you held that year. You smile, because life here is built on small things, on crumbs and candles, on jokes whispered in cold air, on boots that don't quite fit and bread that doesn't quite rise, on the quiet refusal to disappear. And so you whisper, not for anyone else, but for yourself. I'm still here. And that is enough. The snow falls gently tonight, slower than before, as if the sky itself is tired and ready to sleep. Your village is quiet. No dogs barking, no carts creaking, just the sound of logs settling in the hearth and the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, in and out, soft and sure. The walls of your home are rough, patched, imperfect, but they've held through storm and sickness, just like you. You close your eyes and hear the memories behind your eyelids, crackle of harvest, the hush of prayer, the murmur of your sister's song by candlelight, the sharp burst of laughter over a spilled cup, the silence that followed a name spoken at All Saints' Eve. All of it is yours. All of it made this year. You've lived among lords in famine and frost. You've eaten bread so thin it cracked. You've walked miles for coins, for herbs, for dignity. But now, as sleep pulls you deeper, those struggles begin to blur, not vanish, but soften. Edges round off. Weight lifts. Your body remembers work. Your mind remembers care. And your spirit? Your spirit remembers light, even in the darkest days. You're not a knight. You're not a priest. You're not a name etched in stained glass or ink. But you are a story, one that endures, one that matters. So now, let your eyes close. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let the warmth of the hearth echo in your chest. Let the snow keep falling. Let the past keep whispering, "You have done enough. You are enough. Sleep well.